My name is Dominic, and I want to begin by telling you something you've probably heard before. Nice guys really do finish last. I used to think that was just a saying, something people toss around when they felt bitter or unlucky in love. But I learned the truth the hard way, painfully. I was just weeks away from marrying the woman I loved when I received a voice message that wasn't meant for me. That one recording crushed everything I believed about our relationship, shattered the image I had of the woman I was about to marry, and exposed just how wrong I was about where I stood in her life. I want to take you back to the very beginning, from the moment we first met to the heartbreaking realization that I was never her first choice, just the comfortable one she settled for. It all started 3 years ago at a wedding, an event that, looking back, completely changed the direction of my life. I was there for the groom, one of my closest childhood friends, practically a brother. He was marrying the love of his life, and I couldn't have been happier for him. The bride, naturally, had her group of bridesmaids around her, and among them was Natasha, the woman who would eventually become my fiancée. I'll be honest, she was beautiful, and she caught my eye more than once that day. I think we exchanged glances a few times, too. Nothing major, just fleeting moments, but enough to make an impression. We had a couple of short conversations throughout the day, just casual chatter during the reception and in between speeches. But with all the excitement, dancing, and catching up with old friends, I never got her number. Something about that bugged me. I had this quiet feeling, like I'd missed something important. And normally, I'm not the type to chase a fleeting connection or obsess over a chance meeting. But something about Natasha lingered in my mind. So I did something I don't usually do. I called up the groom a few days later and asked if he could get Natasha's number from me through his wife. He laughed and joked that I was sounding desperate, but I told him plainly, if I don't at least try, I'll regret it. Eventually, he passed along her contact info, and that's how it began. Our early conversations were light and friendly, checking in now and then, keeping it casual. I was honest with her early on. I told her I found her interesting and that I'd like to get to know her better, see where things might lead. That's when she told me the truth. She was already in a relationship. She didn't sugarcoat it or lead me on. She made it clear and upfront. I respected that. She even admitted the relationship was rocky, not exactly fulfilling, but she was still in it, and that was enough for me to step back. I wasn't about to make things messy. If she had unresolved stuff in her life, I wasn't going to be the guy who complicated it further. But something strange happened after that. The more I kept my distance, the more she found ways to stay in touch. Little messages here and there, random check-ins, questions that felt more personal than they should have. I couldn't figure it out. Was she confused, keeping me around as a backup? Or did she actually enjoy our connection? I didn't know what to make of it. Still, I didn't walk away either. I wasn't chasing, but I didn't cut her off. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was hope. Maybe I was just waiting to see if the situation would change. And eventually, it did. About 2 months later, I found out she had broken up with her boyfriend. I didn't hear it from her directly at first. It came up in conversation through mutual friends. But almost immediately, her texts became more frequent. She started asking about my plans, joking about joining my friends and me on weekend getaways. It felt like something was shifting. At first, I didn't want to read too much into it. I liked her, sure, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Still, when someone starts inserting themselves into your world like that, it's hard to ignore, so I stopped resisting. We began spending more time together, sometimes just the two of us, other times with my friends. Either way, she became a consistent presence in my life. And honestly, I enjoyed having her around. 6 months after her breakup, we had the talk. We sat down, laid it all out, and decided to make things official. She said she was ready. I was too. From that point on, she began to open up. She talked about her ex, a guy she described as emotionally unavailable and manipulative. She said he'd only show up when it was convenient for him. She called herself a lover girl, someone who gave everything when she was in love, but always felt like she was begging for scraps. I listened, and maybe it sounds naive, but I genuinely believed I could treat her better. I believed I was better. So I leaned in. I gave her my time, my energy, my attention. I stayed consistent. And people noticed. Friends would say things like, "You two just make sense." And I started to believe it too. On the surface, everything felt solid. It made me proud to be her person. 2 years into our relationship, the idea of a road trip came up. It was something I'd done for years with a small group of friends, a way to push myself out of my comfort zone, since I've always been more of an introvert. When I mentioned it, Natasha was immediately excited. She's the adventurous, outgoing type, always ready for something new. So naturally, she was all in. By then, I'd already been thinking about proposing. And something about that trip felt perfect. The open road, the friends, the vibe. So I brought the ring along. I waited for the right moment, and then I asked her to marry me. She burst into tears the second she realized what was happening. She said yes without hesitation, and held me like everything in the world had just fallen into place. I remember thinking, this is it. This is the kind of love story you hope for when you're serious about someone. When we returned from the trip, real life picked back up. Wedding planning began. There were a million things to organize and decisions to make. To keep everything simple, Natasha moved in with me. It was a logical next step. We were building a future together. After all, at first, it felt like a fun transition. We woke up together, talked about everything, made plans. Slowly, her sister Monica started getting more involved. She was constantly around, or on speakerphone. I didn't mind at first. Sisters are usually close. But sometimes I couldn't tell if they were still talking about wedding details or just gossiping about things that felt a bit too personal. One afternoon, I walked into the room and caught Natasha mid-conversation. She was telling Monica, living with him in one house feels different, and stopped cold when she saw me. She quickly changed the subject. I didn't say anything. I let it slide, assuming she was still adjusting. After all, we'd gone from spending weekends together to sharing a home full time. That takes getting used to. We had agreed to give ourselves several months to prepare for the wedding. And for the most part, things stayed peaceful. No big arguments. No red flags. One night, she even joked, "Honestly, I thought we'd be arguing by now, but it's been weirdly chill." I laughed, thinking it was a good sign that we were aligned, stable, ready. What I didn't realize was that her words held a different meaning, one I wouldn't fully understand until it was too late. 2 weeks before the wedding, everything still seemed perfectly on track. We had just wrapped up our pre-wedding celebrations. Hers was a full-blown weekend escape with her closest friends. City lights, coordinated satin robes, personalized champagne glasses, and what felt like an endless flood of Instagram stories. Mine was much more laid back. Just a couple of days at a cabin with the guys, grilling, drinking, and talking about everything but the wedding. It felt like the last lap of freedom before we stepped into a new chapter, something I truly believe we were both ready to embrace. Plans were already set in motion. Our families had booked flights, reserved hotel rooms, picked outfits. Excitement buzzed in every group chat. I'd originally hoped for a more intimate ceremony, just family and a few close friends. But Natasha had a different vision. "It's the one day I've dreamed about since I was a little girl," she told me. I wanted to be something I'll never forget. I didn't argue. I shelved my quieter dream and let her lead. When I agreed, the look on her face made it worth it. That smile meant more to me than any amount of stress or spending. I just wanted her happy. Everything was moving quickly, and sure, the pressure was building. But it felt like the kind of pressure that comes with preparing for something important. Stressful, yes, but filled with anticipation. From the outside, everything looked picture perfect. I had no idea how quickly it would all unravel. That afternoon, I was still at the office, finishing up a few client files when my phone buzzed. It was a voice memo from Natasha. We often sent each other little recordings, reminders, quick notes, random, "I love you" messages to break up the day. I tapped play without thinking. But the moment her voice came through, I knew it wasn't meant for me. There was no greeting, no affectionate tone. I felt like I had been dropped into the middle of a private conversation, one I was never supposed to hear. It took a few seconds to process, but the words hit like a punch to the gut. She was talking about me. She didn't use my name, but she didn't need to. She said she wasn't sure she wanted to go through with the wedding, that I was kind and dependable, but not thrilling, that our relationship lacked intensity because we didn't argue, and without the sparks of conflict. She felt something was missing. She talked about feeling like she was settling, that I was a safe choice, and maybe she was going through it out of fear, that the reckless guys she used to fall for would just hurt her again. Then she laughed, an awkward, guilty laugh, and admitted she sometimes fantasized about calling the whole thing off, just to breathe again. I sat there frozen, phone in my hand, heartbeat hammering in my ears. My brain wanted to dismiss it, pretend it wasn't real, but I knew it was. I listened again, and it was clear this message had been meant for someone else. Probably her sister, Monica. They talked about everything. Her tone was too raw, too honest for anyone else. It was the kind of confession you only make to someone who knows all your masks. Without thinking, I forwarded the message to my cloud drive. I wasn't even sure why. Maybe fear that she'd realize a mistake and delete it. Maybe I just needed proof of what I'd heard in case I started to doubt it later. The files on my screen blurred. I closed my laptop. I didn't want to go home. I couldn't face her. Not yet. So I walked out to my car and sat there motionless in the lot. I didn't call anyone. Hours slipped by without me realizing. I just sat there, trying to wrap my head around how the woman I was supposed to marry could speak about me like I was a temporary solution. It wasn't just cold feet. It was the way she made love and stability sound like boredom, as if emotional safety was somehow a weakness, like loyalty and calm had become synonyms for unremarkable. She didn't want peace. She wanted chaos that felt like passion. And I, apparently, was too quiet, too dependable, too simple to be enough. I stayed there until the sky dimmed and the parking lot emptied. Nothing would be the same after that. When I finally walked to the front door, everything looked normal. Too normal. Natasha greeted me with a bright smile. While I stood in the kitchen filling a glass of water, she walked over, kissed me lightly on the cheek, and casually asked if I'd seen her charger. Just like that. Like nothing had happened. And I just stood there, holding that glass, staring at her like she was someone I didn't know, still trying to understand how she could be so at ease living inside a lie. I didn't say much that night, just mumbled something about being worn out and heading to bed early. She didn't question it. To her, everything seemed perfectly normal. That alone told me she had no clue about the damage she'd caused. I slipped under the covers, eyes closed, pretending to sleep. I could hear her moving around the apartment, going about her evening like nothing had changed. Sleep never came. By sunrise, I had made up my mind. Quietly, I got dressed, packed a small overnight bag with just the essentials, and sat down at the kitchen counter to write a note. It was brief, but there was no room for misinterpretation. That voice memo was meant for your sister. I heard it instead. I won't marry someone who doubts how they feel about me. You have 3 days to leave and return my key. If not, I'll have to involve the authorities. I left the note beside the coffee machine. Her first stop every morning, grabbed my bag, stepped outside, and closed the door behind me. Later, my phone lit up with her name. The calls came in one after another. I ignored the first two. On the third, I finally answered. Her voice cracked the moment I said hello. Through sobs, she kept insisting it was a fleeting moment of uncertainty. Thoughts she never intended to share aloud. She said she was overwhelmed and just venting to her sister. I stayed quiet, letting her speak. When she finished, I responded evenly. People don't rehearse doubts like that. You weren't just venting. You were admitting something you've been carrying for a while. I told her she longed for chaos and unpredictability. She was free to chase it. I wouldn't be standing in her way. Then I ended the call before the apologies turned into begging. But she didn't stop there. She pulled in anyone she could, friends, cousins, even her parents, hoping they'd talk me out of leaving. The thing is, she never told them what was actually in that memo. All they heard was that I'd overheard something I wasn't meant to hear, and suddenly canceled the wedding. That part stung the most. She didn't even own her words. But I had the memo saved. Before she could delete it from our chat, I'd already backed it up to my cloud. So when someone asked what happened, I didn't bother trying to explain. I just sent the audio. Let them hear the truth straight from her lips. Her parents called too, trying to make sense of it all. Her mother rang twice in one evening. When I finally picked up, she didn't sound angry, just devastated. She said every couple goes through rough patches, that pre-wedding nerves are normal. I understood that, but I calmly told her this wasn't a cold foot situation. This was clarity. I wasn't going to marry someone who viewed me as a safe option, someone she chose only because the wilder choices had already burned her. By the third day, just like I'd asked, Natasha moved out. She slipped the key under the door while I was gone. It hurt, but somewhere in the pain, I realized I had dodged a far worse future. A lifetime of quiet resentment, of waking up next to someone who always wondered what she'd missed. A week passed. I thought that was the end of it. But one evening, unexpectedly, there was a knock. I opened the door, and there she was. She stumbled through her words, told me she didn't mean any of it, that it was just a dumb moment, a thoughtless recording, something she never intended to say or even keep. I let her speak. When she finished, I looked at her and asked one question. If I hadn't heard that memo, would we still be getting married while you pretended to be happy? Her lips parted, but no answer came. Just a silence. And in that silence, I found all the truth I needed. She wasn't ready to be honest with herself, let alone with me. She reached out to touch my hand, said there was still time to fix things, to postpone the wedding, to try again. I told her no. Everything was off. There was no going back. She pleaded again, saying people say things they don't mean. But I told her this wasn't some slip of the tongue. This was her truth, accidentally exposed. And you don't build forever with someone who only shows you their heart by mistake. She didn't leave, just stood there, hoping I'd change my mind. So I walked away, locked the door behind me, and left her standing on the porch, empty-handed. That was the last time I saw her. What about you? Would you have walked away too after hearing that voice memo? Or stayed and tried to make it work? Let me know in the comments, and if the story hit home, don't forget to like and share the video.